What if I told you that investigators discovered a teenage driver's phone had been in the exact area of a deadly crash just days before it happened? According to prosecutors, GPS data from Mackenzie Shirilla's phone showed her near the location where a horrific crash would later take place. They argued that this was no coincidence and suggested she may have been scouting the area ahead of time. But was she? Was Mackenzie Shirilla really planning something that night? Or was it just a tragic sequence of events that changed everything forever? This is the case of Mackenzie Shirilla, a 17-year-old girl from Ohio who became the center of one of the most controversial true crime cases in recent American history. On July 31, 2022, Mackenzie was behind the wheel of a car carrying her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, who was 20 years old, and his friend Davion Flanagan, who was 19. What should have been an ordinary drive turned into a high-speed crash that ended in devastation. The car slammed into a brick building at extreme speed. Both Dominic and Davion lost their lives that night. Mackenzie survived. From that moment, everything changed. Investigators began asking difficult questions. Was this simply a tragic accident? Or was there intent behind what happened that night? During the investigation, prosecutors pointed to several pieces of evidence, including vehicle data, surveillance footage, and phone records. One of the claims raised in court was that GPS data from Mackenzie's phone showed she had been in the same general area days before the crash. A detail prosecutors argued could suggest she had knowledge of the location. But that claim, like many parts of this case, remains heavily debated, because the defense tells a very different story. They argued there was no clear proof of intent, and suggested alternative explanations for what happened in those final moments. Years later, the case did not fade away. Instead, it returned to the spotlight after Netflix released a documentary revisiting the tragedy, reigniting public debate all over again. The same question: what really happened that night? Was Mackenzie Shirilla truly responsible for what unfolded? Or is there still more to the story we don't fully understand? But to understand what really happened that night, we need to look deeper into the relationship between Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo. Court records and testimony later revealed that their relationship began when Mackenzie was a teenager. Over time, it became an on-and-off relationship, marked by emotional highs and lows and frequent arguments. Some witnesses described it as intense and unstable at times, while others believed it was simply a young relationship under pressure. But in court, that relationship became a key part of the argument over what really happened, because the question was not just what happened, but why it happened. Now we move to the early morning hours of July 31, 2022. Mackenzie Shirilla was behind the wheel of a 2018 Toyota Camry. In the car with her were Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Surveillance footage and investigation reports showed the vehicle moving through Strongsville, Ohio, in the hours before the crash. Then, in the final moments, everything changed. According to prosecutors, the car suddenly accelerated to around 100 miles per hour. Data from the vehicle's event recorder, often called the black box, allegedly showed the accelerator pedal was fully pressed in the final seconds before impact. There were no visible signs of braking, no skid marks, and within moments, the car crashed directly into a brick building. The impact was devastating. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan both died at the scene. Mackenzie Shirilla survived. After the crash, investigators were faced with one major question: was this a tragic accident? Or something intentional? To answer that, they examined multiple forms of evidence: vehicle data, surveillance footage, and phone records. Prosecutors argued that the pattern of acceleration, combined with the lack of braking, suggested deliberate action, rather than a loss of control. They also pointed to location data from Mackenzie's phone, arguing that she had been in the same general area days before the crash, which they suggested could indicate familiarity with the location. However, this point was heavily disputed and remains debated, because the defense presented a very different explanation. Mackenzie Shirilla's defense argued that there was no clear proof of intent. They suggested that she may have experienced a medical episode, or sudden loss of consciousness behind the wheel. They also stated that she had no memory of the crash itself. But prosecutors rejected that explanation, arguing that the physical evidence from the vehicle did not support an accidental scenario. This conflict between two completely different interpretations became the center of the entire case. In 2023, Mackenzie Shirilla stood trial in Ohio. It was a bench trial, meaning a judge, not a jury, would decide the verdict. After reviewing the evidence, the judge found her guilty of murder. She was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The decision shocked many people online, especially because of her young age at the time of the incident. But others believed the evidence presented in court supported the verdict. For a time, the case slowly faded from mainstream attention, until years later, when Netflix released a documentary titled The Crash. The documentary reintroduced the entire case to a global audience and brought new attention to the evidence, the trial, and the people involved. And now the question goes to you. Was this a calculated act, or a tragic moment that spiraled completely out of control? Because even today, people are still divided. Some believe the evidence presented in court tells a clear and complete story. Others believe there are still unanswered questions, details that don't fully connect, and moments that still feel unclear. But regardless of which side people take, one thing is certain. This case didn't fade away after the trial, continued to live on. And people who had never even heard of Mackenzie Shirilla suddenly found themselves trying to understand one of the most controversial cases in recent true crime history. But behind all the opinions, all the debates, and all the headlines, there are still two families at the center of this story. Families who lost loved ones in a tragedy that changed everything in a single moment. No matter what anyone believes about intent or accident, the impact of that night cannot be undone. And maybe that is why this case continues to attract attention, because people are still trying to understand how something like this could happen. If you've watched everything so far, take a moment and think about it. What do you believe really happened that night? And do you think the court got it right? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more true crime stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to Star Life with Precious